Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about comments. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Fredrik, do you believe in comments? Do you think they're useful? And what, according to you, is a really good comment? So this is a great question. The short answer is that I do believe in comments. I think that you should use them sparingly rather than comment absolutely everything. And the most useful type of comment is the sort of comment that frames a piece of code so that it is comprehensible to you what decisions have been made. So an example of such a comment is a comment that I actually saw this Monday, where I was looking at an integration and I saw that the code was disabled, and then there was a comment explaining that, oh, on this and this date we disabled this integration temporarily because we had a business decision that was made and we needed to unplug. You can talk to this and this person and then the contact information of this individual to understand more. That is a really useful comment because it is the case that not all things about a system can be inferred from the code. And it is a bit of a journey of discovery sometimes, actually. Something that I try to be very conscious about is the way that I structure multiple parts of a system in order to create a natural breadcrumb trail between different parts. What I mean by that is basically that when you're working on a feature, you may be in a situation where you have more generic areas of the code that also ties into the behavior of this feature. An example would be that, let's say for the sake of argument, that you have an ordering system. Now, ordering systems are interesting because there are multiple ways that you can handle dispatching orders and like dealing with the process of allowing a user to place an order. So let's say for the sake of argument that placing an order does not equate to that the order is immediately sent to the third party or the manufacturer who is going to provide the customer with whatever product it is they purchased. And it's not the case, because that's actually not that common, that the email that confirms that the user has placed that order is dispatched immediately. So let's, for the sake of argument, say that I have a service or I have some piece of logic where I actually dispatch the order logic to, or rather where I place the order within my system, because my system needs to have that order. And then I read that piece of logic. What can I infer from just without knowing about all the other different parts of this feature? Because there are a few requirements that if you were paying attention, you kind of figure out immediately how the behavior of this is actually going to work, sort of. So I look at that and I see, okay, we place an order in our part of the system. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I, from just understanding that part of the system, know that we likely have a batch job or something like that is continuously sending out new orders, because we might have multiple orders that are going to go to the same supplier or the same manufacturer. So we might want to batch them and run them on a daily type of task. In this case, this was actually one of the ways that this was, well, for me, this is one of the ways it works. And the same thing goes with emails. Like, emails is something that you put on usually you don't dispatch like every single email immediately, because that becomes very heavy. You rather queue it up, or you have a third-party integration or something like that that does do these sorts of things, right? An email service provider. So these three parts here is actually very tricky for someone who isn't already in on the joke, who doesn't already know how this feature works, to figure out that all of these things are actually connected. So what a comment can do here is to give you a trail to follow. You can put a very simple comment over when you save something in your own system, stating something like, after saving this, the batch job will pick up the order and dispatch the order to the manufacturer on a regular interval or a daily basis or whatever time interval you have, and then the email will be sent out and will be put into our queue or sent to our email service provider, something like that. That comment there gives me a breadcrumb trail to follow when I see it. And this is the sort of comment that I was mentioning, that there was an integration, the code was commented out. Why was it? Well, there was an explanation and a contact person where I can learn more about the feature. And that's the key thing about a good comment, if you ask me. A good comment is not, oh, this variable holds a number or something that I can very easily infer from the code. It is something that gives me a context of a frame of reference, if you will, to this logic, because certain features you can't actually understand why they work in a certain way without understanding the feature. And understanding features is usually a lot harder than understanding one piece of logic, because a feature is scoped and usually only exists, like the actual specification of how it's going to work is actually very often lost over time. People forget exactly how it's supposed to work. You just have these sorts of these things in your head, and if you know someone in that department that kind of was involved and they know how it's supposed to work, and then you have a PO over there who kind of started new, like fresh, but the old PO transferred some knowledge. Like over time, you actually lose the specifics of how a feature is going to work. This is a really, really big problem, guys, that the specification of, or rather the definition of done for something actually gets lost in translation. This is one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of Gherkin and behavioral-driven development, because it helps mitigate this sort of problem. So what I want you to take away from this is that I believe the comments are very useful, and the most useful comments that I know of are the comments that give you a frame of reference on the feature that you are working with. Because when you're working in a really large code base, it's very hard for you to know that unless there is some connection in the code. I mean, other ways of creating a breadcrumb is that, let's say that you have, this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't use strings if you can to reference a value of some sort. If you have a string in one part of the code that represents some magical value that you're going to match against, and then you have that exact same string in another place where these two things are actually connected, put them in a variable and reference the same variable in both of these places, because then you create a connection between these two pieces of logic, which means that if I find this part down here, then I can immediately know that, oh, there's a connection up here, and then I can follow that trail and find that, oh, this logic is tied into that logic. But if you separate those, it's very hard for me. Well, I can search for the string, of course, but it's harder for me to figure out that, oh, these things are actually connected, because features are possibly spanning multiple sections of a code base, such as in the example I gave you. In order for me to be able to fully understand that feature, I would have had to have an intimate knowledge of batch jobs, that there are batch jobs, and the email dispatching and how that is supposed to work, and then I also need to know how the order placement system works within our own system. And if you put a comment just explaining that these parts are involved in order to make this feature work in the intended way, it helps a lot for people coming into this part of the code that don't actually know all that much, or don't have all of these different requirements in their head, which is a very, very good thing. Have a great day.